My husband cheated on me with his receptionist, but when I asked for help, my parents blamed me and abandoned me. Now that I'm engaged to a millionaire, they came back begging. But my revenge left them speechless. I'm 33 years old. I work in digital marketing, and there's something I need to get off my chest because I still can't believe my own family did this to me. The thing is, like 8 years ago, my life went to shit when I discovered my husband was cheating on me, and instead of supporting me, my parents literally blamed me and shut the door in my face. But now that I'm engaged to a man who, you know, has money, suddenly they want to be part of my life again. And no, it's not as simple as it sounds. I guess I should start from the beginning so you understand the level of betrayal I'm talking about here. I married Connor when I was 25. It was a nice wedding. Nothing extravagant, but pretty. And my parents, Kenneth and Sharon, seemed happy. Or so I thought. Connor worked at an accounting firm. I was starting my career in marketing. And everything seemed normal, you know? Like any young marriage trying to make it. We had a small apartment. A cat named Mr. Whiskers. Yes, I know. Super original. And we made plans for the future, like buying a house, having kids, all that stuff. The thing is that during the first few years, everything was fine. I mean, we had our normal fights like any couple, but nothing serious. Connor sometimes worked late. I did too. And since we were both focused on our careers, I didn't give much importance to those things. My parents lived like an hour away from us. We saw them often. At Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays, you know how it is. I have 2 older siblings, Douglas and Florence, and 2 younger ones, Clarence and Edith. Douglas and Florence were always like my parents' favorites. I don't know why, but it was always like that. Clarence and Edith lived in another state with their families, so I didn't see them as much. Everything changed 8 years ago, when I was like 25, almost 26. Connor had been acting weird for a few weeks. He was coming home later than normal. He was glued to his phone all the time, and when I asked him what was going on, he'd tell me nothing, that it was work, that they were with a big client, blah, blah, blah. I wanted to believe him. You know what I mean? Because you don't get married thinking your husband is going to betray you like that. But one night I came home early, like 7 in the evening. Normally I'd get home around 8. And Connor wasn't there. His phone was on the kitchen table. He had forgotten to take it to work or wherever he was, and it started ringing. I'm not one of those people who check their partner's phone. Honestly, I always thought that was toxic, and that if there's no trust, there's nothing. But something in my stomach told me to look. It was a message from someone named Becca from the office that said something like, "Can't wait to see you again, last night was amazing." And I just stood there in the middle of the kitchen feeling like the floor was opening up beneath me. I opened the phone. The password was my birthday, ironically. And there were messages, photos too. Things I'm not going to describe here, but that basically confirmed that Connor had been sleeping with his office receptionist for months. Literal months. I don't really remember what I did after. I think I sat on the couch and stared at the wall for I don't know how long. Connor got home around 9, saw me with the phone in my hand, and his face, God, his face was enough to confirm everything. He didn't even deny it at first. Just stood there saying things like, "I can explain," and "It's not what you think," when it clearly was exactly what I thought. I told him to get out, to leave the house, and he tried to hug me. Can you believe it? After all that, he tried to hug me and tell me he loved me, that it had been a mistake, that Becca meant nothing. I screamed at him to leave, and eventually he did. He went to a hotel or something. I don't know, and I didn't care. That night I didn't sleep at all. Obviously. And the next morning I called my mom crying. I told her everything, expecting her to tell me I could come stay with them for a few days while I figured out what to do, because our apartment was in Connor's name and I technically had nowhere to go. And here comes the part I still can't believe. Seriously. My mom was quiet for a moment, and then she said to me, and I swear, these were her exact words, "Hannah, what did you do to make Connor seek affection from another woman?" I froze. I literally couldn't process what I had just heard. I said, "Mom, what? I didn't do anything. He cheated on me." And she started with all this shit about how men don't leave a marriage if they're satisfied at home, that there must have been something I wasn't doing right. That maybe I worked too much or didn't pay enough attention to Connor. I told her she was crazy. That Connor was the one who broke the marriage vows, not me, and that I needed a place to stay, please. And she told me, with that cold voice she used when she was disappointed about something, that she and my dad weren't going to support my decision to leave Connor. That marriage was sacred and that I needed to work on fixing it. I couldn't believe it. I said, "Mom, he cheated on me with his receptionist. I literally have proof on his phone." And she kept going on about how marriages go through difficult things and that I was too immature to understand how relationships really worked. I asked her if I could come stay with them even just for a week while I found another place, and she said no. If I decided to leave Connor, I'd have to solve my own problems, because they weren't going to be part of that. And she hung up the phone, and I just sat there in total shock. I called my brother Douglas, thinking maybe he'd be more reasonable, but he came at me with the same shit. Florence didn't support me either. She told me Mom and Dad were right, that I was being too dramatic and that all marriages had problems. Clarence and Edith, the younger ones, called me later and told me they wanted to support me, but they lived too far away and had their own problems. Edith's mother-in-law was sick or something, so basically they couldn't help much. In the end, I ended up calling my friend Heather, who I'd known since college, and she told me to come stay with her and her husband Daniel without thinking twice. I stayed with Heather and Daniel for like 3 months while I processed the divorce. It was the worst time of my life. I'm not going to lie. I cried every day. Not just about Connor, but about my parents. Because how is it possible that your own parents blame you when you're the victim? Connor tried to call me like 1,000 times, sent me flowers at work, showed up at places where he knew I'd be, but I wouldn't talk to him. I hired a lawyer, an amazing woman named Patricia, and she helped me divorce Connor in record time because we had clear evidence of infidelity and we didn't have kids or complex properties to divide. During all that time, my parents didn't call me once. Not once. Douglas and Florence sent me occasional messages asking if I'd reconsidered going back to Connor, as if that were a real option. I blocked them all eventually because I couldn't deal with that negativity while I was trying to rebuild my life. Heather and Daniel were incredible. They and another group of friends were my family during that time. After the 3 months, I got my own apartment, a small studio but nice, and I started therapy because I desperately needed it. Like 5 years went by. 5 complete years. Without talking to my parents or Douglas and Florence. Clarence and Edith called me occasionally, but it was weird, like awkward 10-minute conversations where we didn't talk about anything deep. I moved on with my life, focused on my career, did therapy, went on some dates that didn't lead to anything serious. And then, like 3 years ago, I met Nathan. I met Nathan in the most random way possible. I was at his restaurant with Heather because they'd opened a new place, downtown, and we wanted to try it. The restaurant was incredible, the food spectacular, and at some point, the owner came out to talk to the tables. You know, that type of thing fancy restaurant owners do. He got to our table, we started talking, there was immediate chemistry, and at the end of the night, he asked for my number. Heather made eye signals at me like, "Say yes," and I gave him my number. Nathan turned out to be the most genuine person I've ever met. He owns that restaurant, but also has 2 others, and it turns out his family owns a bakery chain that's super well known in the region, like they have about 30 locations or something. But he never bragged about it. Never. In fact, he didn't tell me about the family business until like our 5th date, because he wanted me to know him as a person, not as the son of the rich bakery family. We dated for 2 years before he proposed to me, and those 2 years were the happiest of my life up to that point. Nathan knew everything, about my divorce and about how my parents had treated me. He was furious when I told him. He told me he couldn't understand how parents could do that to their daughter, but he also supported my decision to keep distance from them. He told me he'd be my family if I wanted, that his family would accept me with open arms, and that's how it was. Nathan's parents are incredible. His mom treats me like a daughter. His siblings included me in everything from the beginning. It was weird at first. I'm not going to lie, because I was used to feeling rejected by family. But they made me feel loved and accepted in a way I hadn't experienced in years. When Nathan proposed to me, it was perfect. He did it at the beach during a weekend we spent on the coast. Nothing extravagant, but super meaningful for us. I said yes, obviously. And a few weeks later, I uploaded a photo of the ring to my social media with a simple caption like, "I said yes," with a ring emoji. I didn't think much about it, honestly. I just wanted to share my happiness with my friends. 2 days later, literally 2 days, I received an email from my mom. It was the first time she'd tried to contact me in 5 years. The email was long, like 3 paragraphs, saying she'd seen my photo on Facebook. You don't know how, honestly, because I thought I had them blocked, but I guess someone else showed them. That she was very happy for me, that she always knew I'd find someone special, and that she'd like for us to talk and catch up. She didn't mention anything about Connor, nothing about how she treated me, nothing. She just acted like nothing had happened. I showed Nathan the email and he told me to do whatever I felt comfortable doing, that he'd support me in any decision. I honestly didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to respond and tell her everything I thought, but another part just wanted to ignore her. In the end, I decided not to respond. I thought that if they really wanted to reconnect, they'd have to do more than send a generic email after 5 years of silence. A week later, on a Saturday morning, my doorbell rang. Nathan was with me. We were having a quiet brunch, and when I opened the door, it was my mom and dad standing there with a box of donuts from some random bakery, not from Nathan's family's, another one, and forced smiles on their faces. I froze. Nathan came over and put his hand on my back like silent support. My mom said, "Hi, honey. We wanted to surprise you," and tried to hug me, but I moved back. I asked them what they were doing there, and my dad, Kenneth, said they wanted to apologize in person, that they'd been thinking a lot about what happened and had realized they were wrong. It sounded rehearsed, you know? Like they'd practiced the speech in the car. I asked them how they knew where I lived, and my mom said Douglas had given them the address, which made me even angrier because that meant Douglas had known where I lived all this time and had never contacted me. I let them in, because I didn't want to make a scene in the hallway. But I made it clear I wasn't happy to see them. They sat on my couch and started with this whole story about how they'd reflected on their actions and realized they had failed me when I needed them most. My mom even had tears in her eyes, but something in me knew it wasn't genuine. Then Nathan asked, very polite but direct, when exactly they'd had this revelation, and my dad stuttered a bit before saying it had been a gradual process. Nathan then said, with that calm voice he uses when he's being sarcastic but polite, "It's interesting that this gradual process culminated right after you saw Hannah got engaged to me, don't you think?" And my parents went quiet. My mom tried to say it had nothing to do with that they'd wanted to contact me before, but didn't know how. And Nathan just raised an eyebrow like, seriously, we're going to do this. Then my dad, and this was what made me realize their true intentions, looked at Nathan and asked him what he did for a living. Nathan told him he had restaurants. And my dad asked, oh, how many? Like he was calculating Nathan's net worth in his head. Nathan said he had 3, and that his family also had other businesses. I could see my mom's face light up. Literally. Like I could see the dollar signs in her eyes. And then my mom said something about how wonderful it was that I'd found someone so successful and stable, not like Connor. That's when I exploded. I told them they couldn't come here after 5 years, after blaming me for my husband's infidelity, after shutting the door on me when I needed them most, and act like nothing had happened, just because now I was engaged to someone who has money. My mom tried to interrupt me, but I kept talking. I told them they'd been the worst possible parents, that they'd abandoned me when I was destroyed, that they'd made me feel like I was to blame for Connor betraying me. My dad got angry and said I was being dramatic, that they'd only tried to give me tough advice at that moment, and that now they were trying to fix things. I screamed at him that his tough advice had been victim-blaming and shutting the door in my face. My mom started really crying this time and said she was so sorry for hurting me, but that she hoped I could forgive them because I'm their daughter. Nathan, who had been quietly observing everything, stood up and told them in a very calm but firm voice that they needed to leave. My dad told him this was between family, and that he had nothing to do with it. Nathan smiled, that smile he uses when he's about to say something cutting, and said, "I'm going to be Hannah's husband in a few months. That makes me family. And as her family, I'm going to tell you exactly what I think. You abandoned your daughter at the worst moment of her life because you decided to blame her for the actions of an unfaithful man. You didn't communicate with her for 5 years, 5 complete years, and now you show up here, with cheap donuts and empty apologies, because you saw she's marrying someone who has money. If you think I'm going to let you into her life again, just to hurt her when you decide I'm no longer useful to you, you're very wrong." My mom looked offended and said Nathan didn't know what he was talking about, that they loved their daughter. Nathan then pulled out his phone and showed them something. I didn't see what it was, but said, "This is a Google search of my family." It took you less than 2 minutes to find out our approximate net worth after seeing Hannah's engagement announcement, right? Don't pretend this is about reconnecting with your daughter for the right reasons. My dad turned red and started stuttering. My mom kept crying, and Nathan just pointed to the door. Before leaving, my mom looked at me and said, "Hannah, please, we're your family. Give me a chance to fix this." I told them to leave and not come back. Nathan closed the door behind them and I collapsed on the couch, crying. I wasn't crying because I missed my parents. I was crying because I'd finally confirmed what I'd always suspected, that they only cared about appearances and what they could get from me. Nathan hugged me and told me he was sorry, that he shouldn't have been so harsh with them. But I told him not to apologize, that he'd said everything I wanted to say but couldn't. We spent the rest of the day in the apartment watching movies and eating junk food, which is basically our way of dealing with drama. I thought that would be the end of it. But 2 days later, my phone started ringing. It was a number I didn't know, but it was from the area where my paternal grandparents live. I answered thinking maybe it was an emergency, and it was my grandfather saying he needed to talk to me about how I'd treated my parents. I asked him who gave him my number, and he told me Kenneth had, that my parents were devastated by my behavior, and that I needed to apologize to them immediately. I couldn't believe it. I explained to my grandparents everything that had happened. About Connor, about how my parents had blamed and abandoned me, about how they showed up after 5 years only because Nathan has money. My grandfather interrupted me and said that didn't matter, that they're my parents and that I owed them respect, no matter what. I told him that respect is earned and that they'd lost mine a long time ago. My grandmother, who was on another extension or on speaker, said I'd always been problematic and that it wasn't a surprise. Connor had cheated on me if that's how I treated my family. I hung up the phone and blocked them too. I sent a message to Clarence and Edith telling them everything, and they told me they'd heard a very different version of the story from my parents. That basically, they'd painted everything like I was an ungrateful daughter who had rejected their sincere apologies. Clarence believed me. Edith said she didn't want to get in the middle of all this. That's fine, I guess. I can't force people to support me. A week later, I received an email from my grandparents, long, like 2 pages, basically telling me I had an attitude problem, that I'd always been like that since I was a child, that I needed to learn humility and gratitude, and that if I didn't apologize to my parents, I was going to regret it. I responded with just 1 paragraph, telling them they'd made it very clear where their priorities were, and that I respected their decision to support their children, but that I wasn't going to let anyone treat me the way my parents had treated me. I blocked them too after that. Nathan and I continued with our life and with the wedding plans. His family was incredible during the whole process. They helped me with everything. His mom even went with me to pick out the dress. Douglas and Florence tried to contact me a couple of times, but I didn't respond. I'd had enough with all those people. Clarence sent me supportive messages every so often, but never did anything concrete. Like they were just, "I support you" messages, but with no real action behind them. 2 months after the first reconnection attempt, my parents showed up again at my apartment. This time, Nathan wasn't there. He'd gone to check on one of his restaurants. They rang the doorbell, and when I saw through the peephole it was them, I didn't want to open. But they kept ringing, and I didn't want them to bother the neighbors. So I opened the door, but stayed in the doorway without letting them in. My dad spoke first this time. He said, "Hannah, I know you're angry, and you have a right to be. We didn't act the way we should have when you divorced Connor. We failed you, we hurt you, and there's no excuse for that." My mom was crying again and said they'd been going to therapy for 2 months trying to understand why they'd reacted that way, that they'd realized they'd projected their own fears about divorce onto me, that they were embarrassed to admit their daughter was getting divorced, and that's why they'd preferred to blame me instead of supporting me. It sounded more genuine this time. I'm not going to lie, but I was still super cautious. I asked them why it had taken 5 years and an engagement to someone rich for them to have this revelation. My mom said it was fair for me to think that it had taken too long to happen, but that they genuinely wanted to try to rebuild our relationship if I was willing to give them that opportunity. She said they didn't expect me to forgive them immediately, that they understood it would take time, but that they wanted to try. I told them I needed time to think, that I couldn't just forget 5 years of pain because they now decided to show up with apologies. My dad said they understood completely, that they'd be waiting when I was ready, and they left without pushing anymore. It was weird, honestly, because I expected more drama, but they just left quietly. I talked to Nathan about all that when he got home. He told me that at the end of the day, it was my decision, that he wasn't going to tell me what to do with my parents, but that if I decided to give them another chance, he'd be there to support me, and if I decided to keep them out of my life, he'd support me in that too. I talked to my therapist also. I had like 3 extra sessions that month processing everything, and in the end, I decided I wasn't ready to let them into my life again. Maybe someday, I don't know, but not now. I sent them an email because I didn't want to have an in-person conversation, telling them I appreciated their apology, but that I needed more time and space before I could consider rebuilding a relationship with them. I asked them to respect that and not show up at my apartment or try to contact me until I was ready. My mom responded saying they understood and that they'd be waiting. Nathan and I got married 3 months later in a beautiful wedding at a vineyard. We invited like 150 people, mostly his family and our friends. Clarence came with his wife. Edith couldn't because her mother-in-law was very sick. I didn't invite my parents, or Douglas, or Florence, or my paternal grandparents. It was my decision, and I stuck with it. The wedding was perfect. Everything went the way we wanted. And Nathan and I are living our best moment. After the wedding, I received a text message from an unknown number, congratulating me. It was my mom using someone else's phone because I still had her blocked. The message said something about how she was glad it had been a beautiful day and that she hoped someday she could be there to celebrate with me. I responded with a simple, "Thank you," and left things at that. I don't know if I'll ever completely forgive my parents. Honestly, I don't know if I want to have them in my life the way they want to be. What I do know is that I finally have the family I always deserved, in Nathan and his family, in Heather and Daniel, and our group of friends who supported me when I needed it most. Last week, Nathan asked me if I'd ever considered having children. I told him yes, that I'd like to, but that I was scared of repeating the patterns I lived through with my parents. He took my hand and told me I was the strongest and most resilient person he knew, that I'd survived betrayal and abandonment and had come out the other side still being able to love and trust, and that made me exactly the type of person who would be an incredible mother. I don't know if he's right, but it made me feel better. I guess time will tell what happens with all this.